Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest back on. I was just looking before for the fifth time now, actually already, Dr. Bill Campbell. And the last time you were on, I think it was episode 291 last May. So it's been about a year actually since we have chatted. So if you aren't familiar with Dr. Bill Campbell, he's a professor of exercise science and the director of the Performance and Physique Enhancement Laboratory at the University of South Florida. And his research is focused on improving exercise performance and enhancing physique through the synergism of resistance, exercise, nutrition, and dietary supplements. Obviously, right up our alley here. And again, for the fifth time having you on, we appreciate you coming back on, Dr. Campbell.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Man, you're racking up the number of podcasts here. Jeez.
Yeah, just stay consistent. I try to do 2 solo ones and then a guest episode per week and just try to stay consistent with it. And I love having guests on because I'm able to connect with you, connect and obviously learn more as well too. I can learn a ton from like your Instagram, all the research papers you put out, but it's also really cool to actually be able to chat with you and you can learn a little bit more doing it that way. Love doing it and being able to connect with people. So again, appreciate you coming back on for the fifth time.
Yeah, that might be my own record for one podcast that many times. Yeah.
I love it. I know you've been on Revive Stronger a few times at least. I feel like I don't know if it's 5, but I know it's probably pretty close to that. I know you've been on that one pretty regularly as well
Yeah.
too.
I don't think it's been 5, but yes, I know it's been multiple times.
Cool. Since it's, been a year since we chatted, any big things that have gone on your end, whether that be personal life, training, anything, research, anything like that?
Yeah, so we're just starting to ramp up for 2 new studies. Probably since the last time we've talked, I've changed my thinking on like aggressive fat loss strategies. We can talk about that
Yeah.
a little bit. I think that's probably it, but that was a pretty big shift in my thinking on the just rapid fat loss or aggressive fat loss phases.
Yeah. So just so people are familiar, you had a paper come out like what, 2022, 2023-ish timeframe, I believe. And it was how quickly can you lose fat or weight without losing muscle, correct? That was what you.
So that was only the abstract, which is like a very short summary of the paper. I'm trying to get that published now. I have already submitted it to 2 journals. It's been rejected twice now. And some people don't understand. Oh, it was a horrible paper. I think it's a great paper. It's just that a lot of papers, when you first submit them to a journals, they don't accept them. And particularly my type of research where I'm having lean people try to lose body fat, a lot of journals don't care because it's not a health it's not a health outcome. So it's like like I always use the example, if you're trying to build bigger glutes on females with research, that's not solving the world's problem. We're not going to publish it. Yes. Yeah. We may have talked about that study before. And since that time, I've read little more research on the topic and solidified my thinking on this. And then second, one of our newest studies where we designed our own version of a aggressive, or I would maybe even a severe fat loss phase.
Cool. Yeah. Would love to hear a little bit more about that and your evolving thoughts around it. Maybe hit on like where you were at and then, how it changed and everything like that.
Yeah, so probably maybe even as recently as even 2 years ago, it might have been a little longer than that. I would always say there's not a place for an aggressive fat loss phase. It's not ideal. And the reason that I say that, and let me also say, I'm not in favor of elongated rapid fat loss or elongated aggressive diets. And that's the key word. And the reason for that is if you embrace crash dieting that lasts for weeks and weeks, or even worse, months and months, you do a lot of damage to your body. There's a lot of negative consequences to that. One of the primary ones, at least in my purview, is the loss of lean tissue. And then that has a host of other problems. The most serious one relative to physique is it tends to develop hyperphagia after the diet is over. And hyperphagia is this insatiable hunger that some research seems to suggest that when you lose muscle after a diet, until you regain that muscle, you will have very high hunger levels. And what we've seen in a few situations is the time that it takes you to gain back the lean tissue that you lost during your diet, you have already gained back all of the fat plus additional body fat after your diet is over. So you're in a worse physique state than you were before you even started the initial diet. And we've seen that multiple times. The other thing that we know with aggressive dieting is it's just not your friend when trying to build muscle, and it makes it hard to even maintain muscle. some research that we did in my lab, and then some other studies that I've been reading, my evolved thinking is that we can be very aggressive for a acute period of time. Now, in my head, I think I have a 7-day approach, a 14-day approach, and a 28-day approach, each one of them becoming less aggressive because it's a longer phase. So what my lab team is doing now, we just got this study approved about 2 weeks ago. We are, for the most part, replicating another severe dieting study that was done in males with obesity. So what we're doing is I'm blending two of my passions here. One is just fat loss. That's my world. And throughout my career, I've been studying fat loss in what I think is the easiest populations to study it in, which tend to be young people, particularly females. And now I want to have a little more of a challenge, and I'm broadening my population to include women that are going through menopause, because especially the perimenopausal years, a lot of women are not responsive to what used to work like clockwork for them. That does work in younger women. So this rapid fat loss study that we're doing, I'm doing this as a case series study, where in case series means it's a bunch of case studies essentially. So 2 women that are premenopause, 2 women that are in menopause or perimenopausal, and 4 women postmenopause, 2 that are on HRT and 2 that are not. Now for the study, it's 4 days of only consuming 1.6 grams of protein per kg of body weight, or about 0.75 grams per pound. And that's going to be 200-300 calories for I'm anticipating that's going to be about it for a lot of these females. Now, it's only 4 days, but in addition to only eating a few hundred calories, we're also having our subjects walk for 6 hours per day.
Oh.
So we have a massive energy deficit for 4 days. And if this study mimics what I've seen in other similar types of studies, what's going to happen is there will be a loss of body fat only, because you're going in and then getting out of this. It's not long enough to lose muscle tissue or lean tissue. It's long enough to target body fat, but not long enough to lose lean tissue. And we're doing blood work, metabolic rate, body composition, body water. Then after the 4 days, 3 days of normal eating, pre-diet levels. Then we do post-test, because that's after 4 days of this, there's going to be some water fluctuations, and we're going to bring that back to normal before we do our assessments. And then we're going to have them come back 30 days later to see if they've maintained their fat loss.
Awesome. Yeah. So 4 days. So with that, I guess what could you I'm sure it's going to be part of the study and what that's going to look like. What could you realistically expect to lose in, say, a 4-day kind of time frame there?
The only reference that we have was this other study in males with obesity, and they lost about a pound per day of fat. So 4 pounds over 4 days. Now, a couple things. They were men with obesity, so a lot more weight to lose. There's one. 2, they had them walk 8 hours per day plus 45 minutes of upper body ergometry. So think of like cycling, but for your arms. So they did have a little bit more of an exercise stimulus than what we're going to have. But our women are going to be more fit. Like they're going to have been resistance training, so they don't have as much fat to lose. But also, one thing I've learned over the years is women maintain their lean tissue much better than males when they diet. I don't think we're going to get a pound per day simply because these women don't have obesity, but maybe 2-3 pounds over the 4 days is at least I would love to see that without any slowing down of metabolic rate and no losses of lean tissue.
And say they do that, what would be some potential strategies that like somebody could potentially get from this moving forward? Is it like, hey, we could do these kind of like short, kind of extreme cuts and then take some days at maintenance, take a couple weeks at maintenance or something like that, and then come back? Is that a potential kind of strategy there that you could take from that if it goes through?
So with the work of my lab, with the work that we did a few years ago, where we did a 14-day aggressive diet, so that was about a 40% caloric deficit. My thinking there was, after the study was over, that's a great, what that offers is when you start a diet, you can start it very aggressively. And that's for two reasons. One, you have the most fat to lose, so your body's more primed to lose fat early on. Two, when are you most motivated to diet? Usually it's the very start. So I like to think, let's leverage this motivation and allow this drive to lose fat when you're going to be able to beat hunger more readily. But if you were to do this aggressive dieting, let's say 6 weeks into a diet, that's not, nobody's going to be very excited about that. So I know psychologically, when I did a previous 2 weeks of very aggressive dieting, 4%, 50% the first week. And then in the second week, I went to 25% caloric deficit. Now, normally a 25% caloric deficit, I'm thinking, I'm dieting, I'm hungry. But when that comes after a 50%, now my mentality is, oh, I get all this extra food that I didn't have last week. It's a totally different psychology. So this next study I see two applications. One would just be what we just said. Let's take the first few days of a diet and hammer it while we have a lot of motivation to do. Or it could be, let's just eliminate this mindset of I'm going on a diet for the next 6 weeks. No, we're going to do 2 or 3 4-day sprints and that's it. And maybe we get the same amount of fat loss with only a very little amount of time in an actual caloric deficit. So those are the two applications that I see. It's almost like high intensity interval dieting is how I'm thinking of this.
Yeah, and I guess with this kind of approach, because it probably sounds great for a lot of people, who would you say you would caution to go this quickly with it, or would you caution anybody, or again, maybe what are some things that you're like, hey, in this process, we want to make sure that this is in check during it.
Yeah, I don't think this is for the general population. This, at least in my mind, it's more for fitness people that have a stimulus on the skeletal tissue, on the muscle tissue to be able to maintain it. And then I would also be I would caution anybody who likes what they're seeing after 4 days and then gets tempted. "Oh, I can do this another 4 or 5 days. And that's completely going against everything that I think we should be doing. It's still not a change in the philosophy of we lose fat slowly over time. It's just that we're just being aggressive and then not, and then aggressive and then not. So I think the people that would be tempted or susceptible trying to elongate the number of days with this type of approach is putting them into just a crash dieting environment. And that is a recipe for disaster when your diet is over.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned initially too. It's okay. Obviously, as the longer the diet is, like you said, 7 days, 14 days, up to 28 days, you need to be less aggressive the longer you go because you're just going to set yourself up here for, like you said, muscle loss, and then we have the issues when we diet, we lose muscle, and then we're super hungry, and then like you said, you end up in this kind of cycle where you're losing weight, regaining it, but it's like you're losing muscle, gaining fat, and like you said, that ends up leading to worse body comp over time there with that. What would you consider? Well, I guess from if we were to look at, I think you said 50% energy deficit. What does that typically come out to in terms of like body weight percentage per week? Do you have a number there on that? That would.
Boy, in that male study, I'm trying to remember. I think over the course of the week, so they lost all this weight, and then when they adjusted back for the water loss after 7 days, it was around 5% of their body weight, I believe. And again, I usually think my world is no more than 1% loss per week. But again, my world also is applied to more fitness people that can't be as aggressive as people with obesity. But no, I think it would definitely be more. If I had to estimate, I would imagine what we're going to see is 2 to 3% over the 4 days in these females, again, who don't have obesity. Now, let me also say this. One of the reasons that I'm doing it in that population is some women in that age range are resistant to fat loss. And I don't know if we're going to see that, but if we do, that's going to be a good education for me as I move some of my fat loss research into this middle-aged female realm. Part of me wants to only recruit females who are weight loss resistant, but I'm not going to do that yet. I'm just want to start with whatever happens, and then I'm probably going to follow this up with people who make the claim that they're weight loss resistant.
Yeah.
Because if you can't lose fat on this for 4 days, then there's
So,
something. Yes.
so-
And they have to be on in our at our university. So we're gonna have pedometers on them. They're gonna come in for testing. We won't necessarily watch them walk outdoors, but if we'll have tabs on them during these 4 days of walking.
and then they'll just like track on MyFitnessPal or something like that.
Yeah, what we're going to do is, because it's, again, it's only 1.6 grams per kg, plus whatever tag along carbs and fats come with that. But the ideal is nothing but pure protein. But I appreciate, like, I just had pulled chicken. It was like 94% protein. There was a little bit of fat. So
Yeah.
we're going to allow tag along carbs and fats with this. So essentially what we're going to do is say, hey, you only have 300 calories. Let's decide what that's going to be. It could be MyFitnessPal, but we will know. We're going to basically work with them to say, okay, what do you plan to eat? Let's make sure you have that for the 4 days. Because if there's not a plan for this, a meal plan, because we're not, if they're flying in, they're going to stay in a hotel, or if they live in the area, we don't want there to be any cheating. So we're hopefully it won't be just, oh, track what you're eating. No, tell us what you're eating and let us do all the calculations to make sure. I know if I were doing this, it would be the pulled chicken. I think I'll make a lot of Jello because I think that's pure protein. And it's, at least in my head, it's like a volume of food. So those would be my two like two things that I know I would be doing on this. And I will do this. I'll pilot this for myself.
Cool. Yeah. No, that'll be awesome. Yeah. That'll be a challenging 4 days, but super cool to hear what happens there. I guess then to sum up your kind of thoughts on aggressive fat loss dieting, it sounds like you're at the point where for a while it was, hey, we want to do this moderate, no more than 1% per week. However, what you're coming to is we can do these these shorter, more aggressive fat loss phases if we want to, potentially in certain populations is what it sounds like. Is that correct in terms of where your kind of thoughts are at around it then?
Yeah, and probably the two studies that changed my mind was one, my lab study, the one we did in my own lab, and then that one that was only 4 days in the males with obesity. What happened there was they lost a significant amount of fat, and then they had them come back 7 days later after this was over, and after the water was reestablished. And what we realized is they maintained all of their lean mass. And then they came back a month later saying, eat whatever you want. And they gained a little bit of body fat back, but not much at all. And previously in these aggressive studies, that's where we saw this hyperphagic response, where there was a lot of harm done with excess body fat gain. Not only did they not gain additional body fat back, they kept almost all of it off. And then they had these same subjects come back a year after the fact, and they still had about 50% of the weight they lost over those 4 days, which was a lot of weight. They maintain that weight loss, and all of the health markers that were not ideal were all improved after the week, after the 30 days, and even at a year. So when I looked at that study, I'm like, there is nothing negative here.
Yeah.
And it was all of the metabolic, the physiologic, the body composition, everything was in the positive direction.
That's awesome. Can you speculate on why you think that might be, that they still were able to maintain all of it? Yeah. Can you, maybe speculate what you think they did well there in that process or anything like that, or any, yeah.
Yeah, in that study, because they were sedentary going into the study, they're just the walking and the upper body arm cycling exercise was enough to stimulate to induce an anabolic stimulus on their muscles. So I think that helped maintain their lean tissue. And my other thinking is, as long as these are short, there's not enough time to lose the lean tissue. The body will hold on to the lean tissue longer than it will excess body fat. So those two things. Now, again, there was no resistance exercise in that study, but as we go to a 14-day aggressive approach, now we're going to have resistance training. If we go to 28 days, of course, we're going to have resistance training. But this 4-day stuff, I don't want the energy. I want all of the focus to be on fat loss, I don't want energy expended towards retaining muscle. One, we're testing females, which already do that better. And two, I don't think it's long enough to cause a loss of lean tissue.
Yeah. So it sounds like in that last 4 day study with the adult obese males, it sounds like what you're thinking is part of what happened there is, like you said, typically when people lose weight, they do it for extended periods of time. They end up losing lean body mass. They regain it via fat mass. Whereas in this particular one, because they didn't really lose any muscle, or they didn't lose any muscle, you think that could have been part of maybe what helped them maintain that maintain that weight loss and fat loss long term. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. And obviously their eating habits had to have
Yeah.
changed,
Right.
but that wasn't, there was no intervention. It was, hey, just come back in 30 days, come back in a year. But again, previous research, when these aggressive phases are for several weeks, we see in a 25% of the time more body fat than what they started with. And again, in that study, the opposite was true. They maintained their fat loss.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. One thing I did want to talk to you about was like long-term kind of weight maintenance. So I think this is a good time to chat about that briefly. Where we know people struggle with that. We've already talked about that. What are some typical strategies, at least in the research that you've seen, that can really help people maintain some weight loss kind of long term?
Yeah, and when you say people struggle with this, I struggle with this. Which is why I think I love being a fat loss researcher, because I'm not a naturally lean person. I have obesity in my immediate family. So all of this stuff really speaks to me. And let me just say, I'm an expert in losing fat. I can lose fat as good as anybody. Can I keep that fat off? Not so much, not so well. So all of this stuff, again, I love it because it's helping me come up with better strategies. I think right now, at least theoretically, one of the best things to help maintain fat loss after a diet is to have a plan after the diet is over, rather than, especially if you're losing a lot of weight, when that happens and there's no plan, what we see, or what I've seen, at least in physique athletes, is once again, a pretty aggressive gain of body weight or body fat. And this is where we can talk about these terms: reverse dieting, or some people will use another, like a recovery diet strategy. So both of those are plans to help with the maintenance of weight loss after the diet is over.
Yeah, so using reverse dieting, like again, it sounds like the big thing is the plan though, like having some sort of game plan, making sure you're doing something versus what most people probably do is they get done with the fat loss diet. It's like, all right, cool, time's it's done. I can just go back and do whatever. But again, having that game plan afterwards can be super important there. And again, that's something that I've definitely seen, at least talking to potential clients, new clients, and then having that game plan for them is super important. You talked about reverse dieting, recovery diet. I do want to touch on those, but before we dive into those, what would you say though are some really important habits to maintain afterwards? What are some things that you're like, hey, we need to make sure we're doing this when that, especially in that period of time right after fat loss dieting as well too?
Yeah, what I always say to that is the most important thing after your diet is over is actually what you did during the diet. And particularly, again, this I might sound like a broken record. That goes back to, did you maintain your lean mass when you dieted? Now, let's say you didn't. That doesn't mean that you're doomed for the rest of your life and that you'll never gain this muscle tissue back. We can gain it back pretty quickly. It's not like that muscle mass is going on forever. However, this is where we associate. You've made it very difficult on yourself to maintain your weight loss when you've lost muscle, for two things: one, the elevated hunger, and two, the suppressed metabolic rate. So those two things combined, if you're going to eat more food because of the elevated hunger, and if your metabolism is suppressed, your body becomes a little bit more like a sponge to store body fat in that period. So in that case, it's a reflection, or hopefully if we're working with a fitness professional, people that devote their lives to helping people with this, they've done everything correctly on the journey to the new body weight. So that's the first thing I would say. And then the second thing is, what other things can we do? I think they're just the same things that we know that work for most people throughout any phase of dieting, which is prioritizing protein. It's the most satiating macronutrient. And then also maintaining some form of aerobic activity levels. We know that regulates appetite. Is it better than resistance exercise? I don't think we know, because at least I'm not aware of research that's compared those two modes of exercise. So a lot of people, at least bodybuilders, after shows, they're almost forced to kind of ease up on the amount of cardio they've been doing because it was so excessive to get stage lean. But I do think it's a mistake to just pull it out completely because of its ability to help regulate appetite.
Yeah, and yeah, I agree. I like that you brought up the fact that you talked about. I think the big thing too is what you do during the diet, right? I think a lot of people just they only focus on that period of time after, but they do forget that what you do in the process of fat loss is definitely going to play a big role in that. And again, I know we just talked about aggressive dieting, but obviously that's assuming that you're weight training, you're eating enough protein. A lot of people, when they want to diet pretty aggressively, what do? They do it for extended periods of time, not really doing a lot of weight training. Protein's probably low, and that's where you see that muscle loss, and that's going to lead to higher hunger levels in that period of time afterwards. So yeah, that's something that I've always said is like, hey, what you do during is super important, right? Have that game plan afterwards, but what you do during is important. What about from like a food choice perspective? Do you think that matters? Do you think it's something where you still want to probably follow good, solid base of whole foods, stuff like that, versus hey, just once you're done with the fat loss phase, now you're just eating anything and everything? I'm sure does that play a role as well too in that period of time afterwards? Do you think, or is it
Yeah, but
individual?
what we know is a highly processed food diet. If that's what you're going to consume, we know that you've just made it harder on yourself to maintain your weight loss because a diet that is high in processed foods does not control hunger as well. And when we put people in ad libitum conditions where they can eat whatever they want, and if they choose more highly processed foods, they consume more calories, significantly more calories. We have some really good research in very well controlled human studies where the people are like basically living in a research facility for a couple days at a time and testing this out. We see increased caloric intake, significant increases in body weight, which again, not surprising. So yes, after the diet's over, we're like, oh, good, now I can relax. Be careful. Do you if and let me just say, as long as you can control calories, you can eat processed foods and not gain weight. But you're making it more difficult. You're going to be doing this in a way where you have a elevated hunger if that's what you're going to do. So the practice of, I always like just as a base, like an 80-20, like if you want to have or desire processed foods, ultra processed foods, I don't think it's a wise decision to say eliminate them because I think that just drives what you're going to be hyper focused on. So allow you to have that, but can we have it in moderation?
Yep, working on that moderation. Still have a good base, but again, like you said, don't completely take it out because, like you said, that can lead to some issues there. Cool. So a couple strategies you talked about too were reverse dieting, recovery diet. And again, it's terminology, right? What are you using it? Like, what exactly is it? I'm sure it depends on each person, but I know that you recently posted on Instagram about reverse dieting. You guys are going to do a reverse dieting study at your lab. So I think it would be cool to chat about that. I haven't really had anybody on specifically. And I know I'm pretty sure you mentioned in the post too that as of right now, there's no research on reverse dieting right now. Is that correct?
Not that I'm aware of. We found a scoping review on the concept, but that's about it. So there's not in the context of the way that reverse dieting is typically defined is after your calories are at their lowest at the end of your diet, that you slowly increase your calories up to a point where you're still now where you're able to maintain your current level of body weight. My team was not aware of any current research that has done that.
Gotcha. And so is that what you guys are like what you're using as your definition of reverse dieting is that?
So we're doing, I guess, we're doing a comparison of that versus some other things. So the research question we're trying to answer is what do you do when the diet is over? With the implication, what do you do to maintain the weight loss that you had? So what we're doing is we're recruiting resistance trained individuals. And by the way, this is a virtual study. So as long as you lift weights and you're between 18 and 50 years old and healthy, not natural resistance training, you could potentially qualify for our study because our main output variable is body weight. So we're tracking body weight. And ideally, we're going to have subsamples of people that are getting research grade body composition assessments as well. But what we have in this study is a maintenance phase to make sure that we know what your maintenance calories are. Then we're going to put you on a diet. and you'll have our subjects will work with a research assistant. So it's a standardized diet where they'll have 15 weeks to lose 5% of their current body weight. So that's 5% is a clinically significant amount of body weight to lose. And we're going to put them on a 30% caloric deficit. We're thinking that should take about 6 to 10 weeks for most people to lose 5% of their body weight. But some people are slower. But if you can't lose that in 15 weeks, something's not right.
Right.
And then after the diet, after you've lost 5%, now we start the actual intervention, which is 3 things can happen here. One, we already mentioned the reverse diet group. They're going to get an increase in calories, let's say approximately 10% every week for the next 15 weeks. The other group is we're going to estimate through the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, Kevin Hall, famous obesity researcher. He's developed an equation that predicts what your metabolic rate is. So we're going to use that, and we're going to bring your calories back up to what we estimate, basically what this equation estimates your new maintenance calories are. So that's going to be the second group. And the third group is going to be ad libitum, where we say, we don't want you to we're not going to give you a plan. You can do whatever you want, because it could be that doing just whatever you want to do may be better for maintaining your weight than us telling you go up slowly. Because I can tell you problems that could happen with going slowly, going up more rapidly, and just being ad libitum. So the reason we're doing the research is because we don't know what is best. And are you familiar with Dr. Eric Trapp?
Yep, absolutely. We've had him on a few times. Yep.
Awesome. So he's our data analyst for this study.
Cool.
So he's had a lot of input into our design. And I also want to say, I have a pretty large research team, all students, and they completely designed this study. They're executing it, and this is large. We're recruiting 300, 400, 500 people to do this study. And what I love about it is completely student directed and executed by my students. I just sit in the back of the room and just, I like this. And I give my 2 cents on some things, but love it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Like you said, it's virtual. So like literally anybody can join. So if anybody, I know in your post, you mentioned, hey, you could get free coaching out of this. So definitely something to look into there with that. Yeah. So obviously the pro is that it's virtual. So you get a ton of people and that's going to give us a lot of data there on that, which is great. So it sounds, go ahead.
And I wanted to mention, that's something that I have to tailor my language on. If I said free coaching, what people will get is research assistant advising, but everybody's going to be on the same diet. So I don't want people to think,
True.
oh, I get free coaching.
Yeah.
Technically, our job is to execute what's given to you, whereas coaches would work with you. And we're not really working with you. It's here's the diet, churn it in every week. So it's a little more abrasive. It's not how I would coach, and it's not how my coaches, a lot of my team are coaches that do this for a living. So I do want to make that distinction. It sounds rude, but it is a research study where here's your plan, execute. And we're here to answer questions, but we're not here to do good coaching, which I wish we could do, but
it's not going to be individualized coaching, essentially, is what you're saying.
yeah,
it's not,
I think that's a great, yes.
Yep. Yeah. You're basically the group you're going to be in. That's a group you're going to be in. And if it works, like you said, there's going to be some probably pros and cons to each. What would you say, or maybe a few, pros and cons of each one? And what do you think could potentially happen here?
Let me start with any one of these could end up being the best. Where things could go wrong is at some point for the reverse diet group, if you keep adding calories every week, at some point you're going to gain weight. The question is, will that happen within 15 weeks of your diet ending? Because that's how far we're extending it. It could be that you gain more weight, or you'd gain your weight back simply because you keep increasing your calories. Now, the reality of that is for the first 7 weeks, you're still eating probably a lot fewer calories than this other group, which we're going right back to their maintenance. So in theory, the reverse diet is pretty low calories for a while. And then at the end of the last 7.5 weeks, it actually may be pretty high calories. So what could go wrong is just gaining weight from that. In what we're calling the NIH group, National Institutes of Health group, where we're estimating your maintenance, Something that could go wrong there is we estimated wrong. This formula is garbage and it gave you way too many calories, or it gave you way too few calories. So yeah, you maintained your weight, but we're also tracking your assessments or your perception of these diets. So maybe you're miserable for the 15 weeks because you're always hungry. And then the ad libitum group, traditionally that would be the worst because what we know is people overeat when their diet is over, but we're not being aggressive. We're giving people up to 15 weeks. I would say a 30% caloric deficit is moderately high. So it's not severe, but it's not low. So there's that potential. But again, I could easily see that being better, which again, that's why we're doing the research.
And I'm sure this is probably, I'm sure you guys have thought about this, but I'm assuming there's, and again, I'm sure the everything's going to factor into this, but there's probably going to be like some people that like may do better with one approach as well too, right? Like it could be individual from that standpoint potentially as well.
Yes. Yeah. Now we won't know because the way research works is it's always a group average. So we're going to be able to report if one group does better, we'll say, hey, on average, this seems to be the best approach. And I think what coaches would say, or what I would do with this data, let's say that one group turns out to maintain weight loss better. That would be my blueprint for my clients that I start with. Hey, the research would suggest this. So unless we need to deviate from this, we will adopt what the evidence suggests. But as we all do, if it's not working or if they're not adhering or something's wrong, we switch. So clearly, yes, this is just like all research. It's not an infallible tool, but it does give us guidelines.
Yeah, it gives guidelines. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Because I do think people probably sometimes with research, I'm sure you have to deal with this all the time being in it. People think that it means it's for everybody. But again, it gives us, like you said, the guidelines there. And at that point, it gives us just tools that we can use potentially with clients. So just to clarify, so you said for the reverse diet group, they're essentially getting, was it a 5% or 10% increase every week, right?
I'm just going to say approximately 10% increase per week.
And that's going to just keep going for the entire 15 weeks, essentially.
Yep. With the idea that it's going to be pretty low coming off of a low by the end of the diet. Again, they're doing a 30% caloric deficit. So if they decrease their calories by 500, let's say, that means they're getting 50 calories every week for 15 weeks. So you can do the math there. Again, if it was a 500 calorie deficit.
And probably like you said, the downside with that is twofold. It's you may be spending more time in a deficit, which means you may feel hungry. This was a follow-up question I did have, but what hormonally or again, from a biofeedback standpoint, you might not be feeling great on the way up. But then on the flip side, what's interesting about that group is it can flip to where now it's like at some point they may actually go into a surplus, a large surplus, or not a large surplus, but they could go into a surplus at some point, depending on how high their calories get, right? Is that kind of
yes, and we expect that to happen. But anecdotally, at least we see this in competitors. Now, we're not studying competitors on purpose. We're studying general population. But I've seen this with one of my clients, which really shocked me. I dieted this female down very low and then did the typical, let's go. And my approach at the time was, I think, about a 2 to 3% weekly increase. So very small. She did it, and she was one of those unicorns, or some people would say, oh, it happens all the time. We got her calories up to where she could not eat that many, and she couldn't gain weight. Now, I don't have an answer to that as a scientist, but I've seen it, and I know other coaches see it as well. I don't know if we'll see that in this case because we're not doing 3% increments, but
could
happen.
Could that be something where like somebody just, for example, you see some people, they obviously really adapt to energy deficit. And then some people they'll adapt to an energy surplus as well too, right? Where they see like NEAT go up a ton. I'm assuming that could be something that could potentially be playing a role, or is this what maybe you're trying to find out with the reverse dieting? Is there something special with slowly increasing that may cause somebody to be able to have a higher total daily energy expenditure?
Yeah, that's probably the most likely explanation, but it's so hard. And we're not even trying to measure NEAT, but it's hard. You have to pretty much, you have to have almost 24/7 surveillance and pedometers, GPS, what else? Triaxial accelerometer, and even those have limitations. So that's always what we think when it happens. Metabolic rate just keeps going up and up. and their NEAT also keeps going up and up. Now we can measure metabolic rate easily. Very hard to measure.
Meat.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then too, with the maintenance group are the one that's going to go to the estimated maintenance. I'm assuming, and you hit on this, but the issue there is it could be off. And so I think maybe this is just goes to show where, again, like we could have a great formula, we could have whatever it is, but really at the end of the day, and this again goes back to just how people adapt, like everyone's kind of maintenance level may be a little bit different potentially, right? Like, again, like these numbers are just going to be they're estimated. And that's the potential downside with that one is it's just the estimated. And again, somebody's maintenance could be a little bit different.
It is estimated on their metrics, on their biometrics. So on their body weight, on their activity level. So there is some individualization with the estimation, but we'll see.
Yeah. Right. No, and like you said, it was Kevin Hall, so I'm sure he's got a very sophisticated formula there that really does help with some of those the individualization of it. And I'm sorry, I don't know if you mentioned this. What are you guys gonna track exactly? What are the metrics that you guys are going to be looking at? Body composition.
So body weight's the main thing because again, this is a virtual study, so any people across the world can do it, and not everybody has access to research grade body composition equipment.
True.
So we're going to track body weight, but we're asking every subject, do you have access to a research grade body composition device like BodPod, DEXA, ultrasound, in-body? And if the answer is yes, we're going to ask them, okay, please get those measures along with your daily body weight. And what we are anticipating is a subsample of being able to track body fat and lean tissue or lean mass over the diet and then over the course of the reverse or maintenance calorie group or all the groups. That's, again, when you do virtual studies, I would love to be able to say, hey, buy this scale in your bathroom, and that's what we're going to use, but they're not valid. And I wish they were, but they're not. Body weight is very valid, and we hope to get a subsample, whether it's 10, 20, 30% of our subjects will be able to get body composition assessed.
Yeah, and just so people know, there's going to be pros and cons to do. Like you said, it's if you do it in person, it's you can probably get these like sophisticated body composition measurements, but then now you're limited to probably a smaller sample size, right? Where now it's like you get more you get a larger sample size, which is great. But now the downside is you are at the mercy of what they have from tracking and whatnot. So then you do miss out on some of these important markers. And again, that's just that's just research, right? Again, it's pros and cons to it.
And if you don't get enough subjects, you can't answer the question because there will be no difference. If you only have 80 subjects or 90 subjects across 3 groups, I can almost assure you they're not going to be far enough apart to say that this was better than the other. So you need to have enough subjects to be confident that if there is a difference, that it's statistically significant. So that's why, yes, we are begrudgingly giving up sensitive body composition estimates, but we're gaining confidence in body weight or gaining confidence in detecting if one strategy is better than the other. The other thing with this is since everybody's resistance training, and we're telling them to not change their resistance training. So if that's followed, we can feel very good that muscle loss is not going to be much. Again, 30% caloric deficit, 1.8, I think, 1.6 or 1.8 grams per kg during the diet phase. I'm not concerned that people are going to be losing lean tissue in our study.
Yeah, no, it sounds like that's for sure not going to happen. And then on top of it, once they start eating a little bit more, it's going to probably put them in a good position too. For some of these people, they may never have even been close to eating consistently like that with good resistance training. So maybe eating a little bit more is going to be helpful for them from a body composition standpoint. But I'm sure too, part of it is I'm sure you, if anything, because it's going to be such a large sample size, I'm sure it's going to lead to a lot of like other questions moving forward that can hopefully help future research as well too. I'm assuming that's probably part of the hope as well too with it.
Yeah, and something we did, which I can't talk about the results yet because we didn't present them. We're presenting them in about 3 weeks at the ISSN conference. We did a large scale survey study of fitness coaches who primarily work with bodybuilders, since we know that's very common in that population. And we said, do you use reverse dieting? How long do you use it? Do you increase calories? And if so, how much? Or do you increase by macros? How much? What do you do with carbs? What do you do with protein? What do you do with exercise? So we did an entire survey study before we even designed this study. And that data from our survey study helped inform what we're doing in this.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's yeah. Again, it's just gonna continue to lead to more questions, and that's what we want to keep finding that. So cool. Yeah, really looking forward to seeing that. I think that will be awesome. And like you said, there's not much, if any, research on reverse dieting, and it's a super popular. I know you can't speak on the results, but I'm sure it's a pretty popular way to go about things. So I'm looking forward to that. Is there anything else on the study that you want to mention or go over? Anything like that you think's important?
No, one thing I would say is we're standardizing protein and calories. We're not sweating over carbs or fats, which that's along with my philosophy, and I would say other research. As long as your calories are controlled and your protein's controlled, fat and carbs don't really matter much when losing weight, even in the reverse diet. Just focus on now within reason. When you start eliminating all carbs or you start
Right.
eliminating all fat, then things can get a little haywire. But we're focusing on the prime movers here, which is calories and protein.
It's funny. I always do the same thing. I'm like, fats and carbs really don't matter that much as long as you got protein and calories. And I'm like, let's back that up a little bit because people usually take that too far and be like, oh, okay, so we don't want it to be completely out of whack there on that. Speaking of, before I let you go, refeeds, diet breaks, we've talked about that multiple times in the past, but is there any update on research around there? Anything interesting that you've seen in the literature on refeeds or diet breaks or anything you're working on there with that?
No, I think the they're very good strategies. I think where they that's a natural fit to this aggressive dieting that
Yeah.
my lab's doing. It's because it's we looked at my lab previously looked at diet breaks, which tend to be 1 to 2 weeks off from a diet. Now we're looking at, okay, how do we maximize the fat loss when we are dieting? So I think my lab or just my career trajectory around fat loss is looking at all of these different strategies and then maybe coming up with a really good comprehensive blueprint overall. But there hasn't been much. I'm not aware of any new research since we published our diet break study, I think about a little over a year ago.
Man, I wish I had the authors, but I'm pretty sure there was like a meta-analysis on it, and it found like very small benefits of diet breaks. I think it was like continuous versus intermittent dieting, and it was like really small benefits from a metabolic standpoint. But again, just like you found, what's meant psychologically, it can be super
Yeah.
helpful. And I have found myself really utilizing them a lot more for clients, where it's like, hey, let's maybe 1 to 2 days a week. It's like almost like a deload from training. It's
Yeah.
the research basically shows like it doesn't hurt you if you take one, and if anything, maybe from a mental standpoint, it can be helpful. And I think that's where like the diet breaks really shine and the refeeds can really shine. And I just and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts just based on what I know. I feel like I know the research I don't think has shown this yet, but from a lean body mass standpoint, to me, it would make sense that having some of those days where you're closer to maintenance could really be helpful from a lean body mass perspective, at least in the long term.
Yeah. It's time that you're not in a catabolic environment, is how I look at it. And if you're in a little bit of even a surplus, now you're in an anabolic state during this overall fat loss phase.
Yep. Cool. Anything else coming out on your end soon that you want to share or anything like that or anything where you want to lead the audience to?
No, as far as research studies, those are the the case series, aggressive fat loss in females, and then the reverse diet study that we're recruiting right now. So if anybody's interested, just you can DM me and I'll put you in touch with my study coordinator at my Instagram handles, Bill Campbell, PhD. So just say I'm interested in reverse diet study. I'll reply back. Here's an email and then give my research coordinator a couple days to get back to you to give you some paperwork to see if you qualify for the study.
Cool. Yeah. And when are you going to be done taking applicants for that? Do you know yet?
We're going to go till we have approximately 500 people because what
Okay.
happens with weight loss studies is people drop out. So we
Right.
want to finish with a little over 300 total people. I imagine we'll be recruiting probably through the middle or end of the summer if I had to estimate.
Okay, cool. Because this episode should be out beginning of June. I think it's like June 7th. So a couple weeks. I just want to make sure that people can still apply
Oh,
when they hear this and everything. So
yeah, yeah,
cool.
I'm pretty sure knowing we need that many subjects.
Yeah, that's a lot. Yep. So cool. Yeah, we'll definitely check that out. Cool. Bill, really appreciate your time as always. Always love and catching up with you, seeing where you're at with the research. So again, appreciate your time and we'll talk to you next time.
All right, thank you.
Oh, actually, one last thing before I let you go. Your research review too. Still going well. I guess another place where, again, people can go and check out your research review as well too, and everything like that.
Yes, my research review, it's the only research review that's solely dedicated to building muscle and losing fat. I summarize 2 research articles every month. And then I bring in expert coaches who help apply that research. Have I had you contribute yet?
Not yet. Nope.
Oh, I got to get you in there. I got to get your expertise. So, if you want to stay on top of the science and then learn from top level coaches or some cases physicians, how do they apply that research into the lives of their clients? That's what that research is. It's called Body by Science. And my website, and let me just say, it's $7.99 per month. It is
Can't
the
beat it.
Yeah, it's such good value. If you're a fitness professional who works with weight loss clients, I would say you're sinning. You're literally sinning if you're not subscribing to this because it helps. It gives you all of the evidence of what you're probably already doing if you're an evidence-based coach. But the studies are there for you because I spend the hours and the hours finding them. If you're interested, you can get some free issues on my website, or you can subscribe. The website is billcampbell.com.
Yeah, and I think what's valuable is you do bring in the coaches to really show how they use it, which I think is super important. Awesome, Bill. Again, appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right, thank you.